Welcome back to Lost Touch Channel. My name is Anton Vieltsin. I'm an attorney in the Southern District of California here in San Diego. When we talk about the Fourth Amendment, the one that protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures, most often we're talking about somebody's residence, like their home or their vehicle. But of course, the Fourth Amendment applies to many other situations. In the last few weeks, I've discussed maybe the most temporary type of dwelling, a tent, and whether police officers can search inside that tent without a warrant. Now, I've discussed a case where somebody put a tent on their private property. Last week, I've discussed a case of a tent being pitched in a public campground and whether you had privacy interests in that situation. And then this week, we're going to focus on a situation where the officers are searching a tent that's illegally pitched on BLM, Bureau of Land Management, land. And whether the Fourth Amendment protects you there, knowing that you're camping illegally. Before we go on, I want to thank you for watching me on YouTube and hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, please give my podcast a 5-star review rating. And finally, if you want to support this channel, consider going to loststash.com and check out some of the merch. Thanks for watching.
Quick message from Lawstash. Are you charged with a crime? Or do you want to know your rights if stopped by police? Watch California attorney Anton Vieltsin discuss legal cases from the Supreme Court, Ninth Circuit, and California state courts on the Lawstash YouTube page. Anton has handled hundreds of federal and state criminal cases, has an in-depth knowledge of the law, and has the best mustache ever. Subscribe to the Lawstash YouTube page. That's LAWSTACHE.
Today we'll be discussing a Ninth Circuit case, United States versus Sandoval. Federal and state law enforcement agents were investigating a marijuana grow operation. This investigation eventually led them to 16 different grow sites and eventual indictment of 18 defendants, including Mr. Sandoval. Now, during a seizure of one of the grow sites, which was located on the Bureau of Land Management land, the BLM land, officers found a makeshift tent which was closed on all four sides. They entered that tent and found a medicine bottle that had the name Sandoval. Now, this piece of evidence tied Mr. Sandoval to the conspiracy. Before trial, he moved to suppress that piece of evidence, saying that the officers violated his Fourth Amendment rights when they entered the tent without a warrant. To determine whether a warrantless search violates the Fourth Amendment, we must ask two questions. First, has the individual manifested a subjective expectation of privacy in the object of the challenged search? Second, is society willing to recognize that expectation as reasonable? First, let's look at the subjective expectation of privacy. Here, the court says that Mr. Sandoval appears to have subjective expectation of privacy if we look at a number of factors. First, the tent was located in an area that was heavily covered by vegetation and virtually impenetrable. Second, the makeshift tent was closed on all four sides, and the bottle could not be seen from the outside. Third, Sandoval left a prescription medicine bottle inside the tent. A person who lacked a subjective expectation of privacy would likely not leave such an item lying around. Now, the government, of course, counters and says that he doesn't have an expectation of privacy because he was illegally growing marijuana. And he was also illegally camping on BLM land, which is not allowed. Now, the court, of course, reminds the government that the case law actually goes the other way. A person doesn't lack a subjective expectation of privacy simply because he's engaging in illegal activity, or could have expected the police to intrude on his privacy. According to this view, no lawbreaker would have a subjective expectation of privacy in any place because the expectation of an arrest is always imminent. Now, let's move on to the objective expectation of privacy, meaning does the society as a whole ready to accept this privacy as reasonable? Now, in LaDuke versus Nelson, a case I've discussed on this channel previously, the court held that a person can have an objective reasonable expectation of privacy in a tent on private property. And just last week, I've discussed the case Gooch, where the Ninth Circuit held that a person has an expectation of privacy in his tent located on a public campsite. But here, of course, we're dealing with a slightly different situation. We're dealing with a situation where an individual pitches a tent on BLM land. This is not a public campsite. However, the Ninth Circuit did not believe the reasonableness of Sandoval's expectation of privacy turns on whether he had permission to camp on public land. Such a distinction would mean that a camper who overstayed his permit in a public campground would lose his Fourth Amendment rights, while his neighbor whose permit had not expired would retain those rights. So here's the takeaway from this case. The Fourth Amendment does in fact protect you against a warrantless search of a makeshift tent located on BLM land, even if it's pitched illegally and against the rules of the federal government. You still retain a legitimate expectation of privacy inside that closed tent. If you learned something from this video, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I know a lot of you watch my channel without hitting that subscribe button. It does in fact help me when you hit it because it grows my channel and it comes up on other people's browser more often if I have more subscribers. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, also please give my podcast a 5-star rating. And finally, if you want to be a real MVP, consider going to loststash.com and check out some of my merch, including the Do Not Arrest This Person t-shirts. Thanks for watching.